We're starting this list off strong with anti-air, and honestly, I already have to add an addendum to this list, because that is definitely an SS tier. AA is just... Actually, let's call it S+, right? AA is just so insanely good. Like, every single division should have AA in it. It doesn't matter if you play single player, multiplayer, have offensive divisions or defensive divisions. Straight up, it is just perfectly good. This is the peak of what a support company is. And the reason for that is very simple. You get a bunch of air attack, you get a little bit of heart attack, a little bit of piercing. Against the AI, this is perfectly fine. Like, this can penetrate up until modern tanks perfectly fine. Especially if you add a little bit of cast. But the AA also gives us reduction of damage. So straight up, even for this, anti-air is already good. But then there's like the other 50 different modifiers. You don't even need anti-tank. Actually, we'll get to that. In general, you don't need anti-tank against the AI, and even multiplayer. You use this on every single division. Pure S+ tier. Moving over to RT, we have a very solid A tier. It's cheap. It gives good stats. It's probably one of the first ones I would cut because it only provides stats. Now, right now, this is not an issue because we don't have that many amazing support companies. But if you just look at this, you know, like, you get 35 soft attack for 12 artillery pieces, 54 production cost. It's very cheap. You get good stats, but that's all you get. You get a little bit of stats. Moving on over to rocket artillery. It is pretty much the same thing. We can see it a little bit clearer if we add support artillery first. With support rocket artillery, we get a little bit more. Actually, there we go. I'm missing a couple of tags. If you get all of these rocket artillery tags, then support rocket artillery gets a little bit better. Then support artillery is more expensive by a smidge. It's negligible. They're both A tiers in my opinion. I would probably put rocket artillery a little bit higher if you are in the late game, but artillery is much cheaper to get. You don't have to invest so much research and you get it anyway. So like, it's a toss-up. If you have both and research is not an issue, and resources, like if we ignore the resources for support rocket artillery or support artillery, then you should use support rocket artillery, but it's such a small difference. Like, we're living in Disneyland here, so usually you would need the research for something else. So technically you could also put it into like C tier because, you know, too much research to invest in there. Now with anti-tank, we come into something very interesting, because that is immediately a C tier. Against the AI, it is pretty useless, since they don't use that much armor anyway. As I said, the anti-air will already suffice. I personally had to use anti-tank already against the AI in like 1970 on a naval landing against modern tanks, while not having any cast or fighter support. That is such a fringe case. Even then, I did not use support anti-tank, because that one just did not give enough stats. 24 heart attack for 144 IC. Instead of just adding one of those shitty anti-tank battalions, I just added 3 normal anti-tank battalions instead of 1 artillery, and they slice through those modern tanks like butter through a hot knife. Admittedly, in multiplayer you can find a little bit of usage for these, but for the most part it's a C tier company, because in multiplayer there's also better things you could do with your IC. Next we come to one of my favorite boys, the engineers. Trust me, they are a solid S tier. They're cheap, they give a ton of entrenchment and a ton of modifiers. Just look at those beautiful terrain modifiers. Just because of the terrain modifiers that you get, they are even good on offensive divisions. They're also good on defensive divisions. Just look at this. They break through forts, they break through rivers, and they can help with naval landings. What more do you want from a support company? Now we're getting to Recon, and for the sake of my channel, I should probably skip this part. Because a lot of people dislike Recon, but honestly, Recon is very good. I mean, I don't want to say very good, but it is very solid. If we just take a look at Cavalry Recon, we get a little bit of movement, which is always fun. You know, speed is nice. I love speed. And you also get artillery soft attack, which is also very nice. Cav Recon is not enough to bump it higher than support artillery, but it is close, and you get movement modifiers. Because of that, I usually use these in offensive divisions, but we'll get to that because Rangers are just straight up upgrades over these Cav Recons. The Motorized Recon compared to the Cav Recon is a little bit more expensive and costs fuel, which it's not a lot, but if you use these in every single division, in your 120 division offensive army group, then this can add up. Honestly, like, sure, it has better stats, but Motorized Recon I only use if Cav would slow me down, and I want to use some Recon in my divisions. Light armor? Why are you watching this video? Nobody builds armored cars. Just build light tanks. They are straight up better because you can design them. They're cheaper, they have MIOs, they're light tanks and not armored cars, which actually were used in World War II, but in Hearts of Iron they are just absolute dog shit. S tier. The Armored Recon Company is a little bit weird. In single player, it is absolutely useless. In single player, this would be a C tier company, just because the stats, they're It costs fuel as well, so you should rather use Motorized Recon. You get heart attack if you use it with tanks, which against AI does not matter. But in multiplayer, this is an S tier company for your tank destroyers. They just get so much more heart attack. Again, for single player, this would be a C tier company, but because of multiplayer, I'm gonna put it on S tier, which is a bit weird. So if you skip to the end, I guess, sucks to be you. The Recon companies are, in my opinion, very nice because they give you more army intel, and this gives you up to 15% more combat stats. It's just a neat little company. I will admit I am biased to them because I like speed, but you know, it's fun. It's a fun company to use. Going over to military police. The only F tier company, the only F tier company that you will ever use, because armored cars don't count. The stats that military police give you are absolutely useless. Who the fuck cares about defense? Soft attack, there are other companies that give you more soft attack. And that's it. I guess for the recovery rate, they could be nice, but they're very expensive and, you know, like, they give suppression. They're used for garrison divisions. You shouldn't use them in your normal divisions. Like, why do I have to explain this? Most games I don't even research those because they're just so useless. And when I research them, I always regret it because then I have to design a stupid division with the 40 light tanks and then the military police, and oh my god, I already want to quit the game again. Now, I did say military police were the only F tier company, but maintenance companies are simply an F tier company because they're a trap. Realistically, they're mildly useful, and a C tier company because they give you reliability and equipment capture ratio. The maintenance companies give you reliability bonus. They don't give you reliability, they give you reliability bonus. This is multiplicatively, not additively, which means a tank with 80% reliability would not get 100% reliability with this. No, it would get 80% plus 80 times 0.2. This is always in a very weird spot. Those divisions that have a lot of reliability get the most out of this, but they don't want this because they have high reliability. They don't benefit from this. And those divisions with very little reliability, let's say your tank has 50% reliability. Great, now he has 60% reliability. That is absolutely useless, because if you're building a tank that has 50% reliability, then you're gonna micro that thing, and then reliability does not matter anyway. And equipment capture ratio is just useless. It relies on the enemy using equipment you want, the RNG favoring you to get the equipment, and then you have to get enough equipment to make up for the lost IC. And then we haven't even talked about that all the maintenance company does is make your division weaker. You get 1 HP and less org, and you use more supply. This is the only support company that straight up makes this. No other support company will make your division weaker. Even military police gives you combat stats. Now, the upside of maintenance companies is that they give you a chance to capture cash. So, they are an S tier company. Oh, with this one I'm gonna ruffle some feathers. B tier for the field hospitals. Honestly, the most divisive one on this list so far, I think. Because field hospitals are either dog shit or your personal S tier. I've met very few people that were like, okay, field hospitals are but usually it's honestly just field hospitals are the one thing that you always use, or they are a waste of IC. For me, they score a little bit in the middle. The thing is, field hospitals are fairly expensive. 170 IC, and you need 20 trucks. For some nations, you can't afford them because they cost rubber. Oh, well, you can't afford such a surplus of them. And they don't really, like, they give you a little bit of combat stats, you know, HP, so you take less damage. The breakthrough is neat, but like 6 breakthrough. You're obviously using that for, I mean, technically nowadays it's 3. Usually, before it used to be just 2, because you have the trickle back and the war support protection. Like, the war support protection, I guess, is neat. Just don't really need to evaluate that, like it's okay. But you want that if you don't have a lot of manpower. And there's a crux, because nations that don't have a lot of manpower usually also don't have a lot of industry. What do you need for field hospitals? A lot of industry. I've already spent a century playing one game of Hearts of Iron. I mean, one in-game century, and many campaigns that went very close to the 2000s. So I will say field hospitals, even if you can't 100% staff them and you know you need the manpower, because let's say you have to fight the US, China, the Soviet Union, Germany, and you're a minor with like 1 million manpower, then you're gonna be very happy about using field hospitals, even if they're not 100% staffed, just because of the trickle back. In these instances, field hospitals are an S tier company. Just chuck that into everything. It is very amazing. Now, outside of this instance, they're kind of a waste of IC. I say that, but you do get less XP loss, which, especially for offensive divisions, is very nice, because the longer they stay at a higher level, the more veterancy bonus they have, which means they perform better, which means they can stay even longer on a high veterancy level. So, for example, we have 45% XP loss. Now, with the additional veterancy that he would keep, we can say, like, you effectively get like 60% experience loss, because they're gonna stay on veterancy longer and then win more battles, so they get a little bit of veterancy back. I honestly haven't found a use case where that really mattered. I really tried to make them work, but it never really felt like the experience loss mattered. I looked at my divisions and like they didn't really keep that much more veterancy level. Maybe I just looked at every single division where it didn't apply. I ran those in like 4 or 5 long game campaigns, and in theory it should be very nice, but I never really felt like it did anything or a significant amount. For me, field hospitals are just used for the trickle back, and the experience loss is a nice little bonus, a little cherry on top that I will often forget is there. I mean, I'm not gonna forget it, but you get my point. Because of that, solid B tier. If you don't have manpower, it's an S tier company, and you have the industry for it. Now, logistics. Also gonna ruffle some feathers there. It's an A tier company. Most of these support companies are situational. Paradox did a relatively good job, in my opinion, with balancing these with arms against spaghetti, because like I've used most of these in my divisions, and I also use a decent chunk of these in the same campaign, simply because like my defensive divisions will have different support companies than my offensive divisions. I'm perfectly fine if logistics are an S tier company for you, but the thing is, they are very situational. If you don't benefit from the less supply usage or the less fuel usage, they don't do anything for you. Sure, again, you get a little bit of stats, but who the fuck cares? Those stats are so small that it doesn't matter. So the only usage that logistics have is if you're fighting in China, bumfuck Siberia, Canada, South America, or Africa. And other than that, logistics are just... they're just useless. If they were more applicable, I would put them into S tier, but I just use them for divisions where I know they are either gonna be very supply hungry, or, you know, I know I'm gonna fight in the Soviet Union. If I'm just fighting in Europe, not a single one of my divisions will have logistics companies. So why should it be an S tier company? Now, signals are a solid B tier, potentially an A tier. I will put them into B, because for single player, they are pretty much useless. Like, they have uses for spearhead divisions, and they can be used in tanks, but often I don't even bother researching them, since the additional initiative is not that worth it against the AI. 46% more initiative, wow! I can also just wait 2 ticks and have the exact same outcome. For multiplayer, especially for your tanks, it's an S+. For single player, I would almost put them into... no, another C tier company. Like, they're still better than anti-tank. Now, oh boys. I did say that AA is an S+, but the flame tank, the medium flame tank is... mashallah, that thing is so nice, so amazing. The thing I love about flame tanks is you can make them incredibly cheap. You can turn them into breakthrough tanks, you can turn them into armor memes, you can turn them into fuel supplies, you can stack more entrenchment for your infantry. The world is your oyster with those things, and it's amazing. And also very important, they give a ton of attack modifiers, a ton of terrain modifiers, which is what you want these things for. Flame tanks are so amazing. In most games, this is your ideal flame tank. It's an interwar flame tank because it just gives you all the stats you need. Look at it, no fucking stats, and it does not matter because it costs 4 IC. Even just the 40% fort attack, and the river attack, and the forest attack, and the mountain attack, and the urban attack, and the jungle. Like, even that is good enough. And then we also come into, as I mentioned before, we get into the very fun territory of using a zoom tank. Look at this, 13 speed. Now, admittedly, that thing is pretty much useless because it doesn't have stats, it's just there to keep up with your fast tanks. But that's a meme template anyway. Then you have like something like the Breaker, which just gives you 80 breakthrough with this design. On top of your divisions. Now, admittedly, this thing costs 20 IC to produce a single flame tank. So it is very expensive. It's also amazing because if you add this thing onto your infantry division, that will just melt the AI. And as I said, like, you can also make some armor tanks and all that, so it's just so cool. Flame tanks are just straight up an S tier. There is no arguing that. And personally, I use them in every single division. For me, it's non-negotiable. Once I have engineers too, and thanks to Götterdämmerung, we won't have to worry about them anymore because they're gonna be a special project. Once I have my dozer blades and I can make my flame tanks, mashallah, I'm done. Now we come to the ugly little brother and the big Bertha of the flame tank, which I'm just gonna make this quick. C tier and F tier. Actually, they're still better than maintenance companies. Let's take a quick look at... There we go. We're gonna use our flame tank, our medium flame tank. And then we're gonna take a look at the light flame tank. One thing that you immediately realize, production cost is a lot cheaper. But again, like, you can make your flame tanks as cheap as the light tanks are, so that doesn't really matter. A little bit worse stats doesn't matter because flame tanks have such massive modifiers anyway. But you get less terrain modifiers, which just makes light flame tanks worse than medium flame tanks, and I don't even know why you would ever bother with light flame tanks. Hey, even with miners I could afford medium flame tanks. If my Ossa can afford medium flame tanks, then you can too. Now, the heavy flame tank is the pendant to the light flame tank because that one has more stats, and like, that's a shitty flame tank. You could technically turn this into something different, but again, has worse terrain modifiers and is a fuck ton more expensive than the medium flame tank. We're gonna stick with the medium flame tank just because it's so expensive. It's an F tier. Next on the list are the super heavy tanks. There we go. I could talk about super heavy tanks, but let me just quickly... 1000 IC in order to get minus 50% river attack, minus 100% amphibious attack, minus 50% forest attack, minus 40% mountain, minus 60% urban. You cannot do anything with those. Sure, the stats are very nice, but what the fuck does that matter if your division can't do anything anymore? And finally, we arrive at the prodigies, the spoiled children, rangers, pioneers, and light flame battalion. Airdrop, paradrop, light tank. It doesn't fucking matter, they are cheating anyway. There you go. It doesn't fucking matter, it's light tanks. It's paratroopers. Paratroopers are so busted. They're banned in every single multiplayer game and even in single player. Why are you using these? You can also just open up the console if you want to use paratroopers. You have the same amount of fun because paratroopers are just so busted. As for rangers and pioneers, they're pretty much just a better version of their base company. So pioneers are better than engineers. I do say that, but it's actually kind of a lie. If we compare engineers and pioneers, pioneers are more expensive and in general they are worse, but they have a very nice benefit, which is amphibious. For naval landings, they are very good, which means if they have to fight, if they have to secure land, they are gonna be so very good and useful. And oh my god, I love pioneers. But as soon as you're in the land, inland, and you know, you're fighting through Leutzeburg, it doesn't fucking matter anymore. They are just worse than engineers. Personally, I will also just keep on using my pioneers for my marines because I'm too lazy to switch them around. But technically you should, because again, ow. Engineers are just straight up better. At least if we're talking basic combat. I'm still gonna put them into S tier simply because like they have a niche use over engineers, and like you're gonna use either of these. Rangers are the only thing that are just straight up broken, because if we compared to the base, the Cavalry Recon, we get into something very nice, which is just they are straight up better in every regard. Sure, you get a little bit more production cost, 50% production cost even, and a couple of movement modifiers, but stats are just way better. And most importantly, they give you not 10%, but 20% of soft attack for each artillery piece. And now, with that, we come into a very nice territory because they are better than support artillery. So if you do like support artillery, just use Rangers because they are everything that support artillery is, but better. They also give you terrain modifiers. The other stats are nice. You get a little bit of initiative. You get recon. Honestly, I just love Rangers, man. And there we have it. The S plus tier, they are just straight up. You're gonna add them into every single division. It doesn't fucking matter. Offensive, defensive, multiplayer, single player. You're just gonna put them into your divisions straight up. S tier should be put into most divisions. Rangers, I would not put into heavy division, into armored divisions. And the armored recon is only for multiplayer tank destroyers. A tier are still very solid, but too situational for me. And then B tier are your fillers that you're just gonna chuck either on just defensive divisions or just offensive divisions, depending on your needs. Oh, you watched until the end of the video. Why don't you subscribe? No, really, why don't you? Also, I guess if you're interested, I also made tank, navy, and division guides. So why don't you watch the tank guide over here?